Today I'm going to show you how I installed a gutter onto my natural stone walls. Well, it wouldn't be me if I didn't design a bespoke arrangement.
As you can see, at some point in the past somebody's rendered the outside of the old stone cottage, and they've used a combination of concrete and various other cement based renders, and it's done the walls of the house no good at all. And I've spent some time over the last couple of years knocking this off. I'm probably about halfway through now. Still got a long way to go, but in the process I came across a small problem. I'm going to jump up in the scaffold and talk a bit more about that. The problem we have is that we don't have sufficient overhang on the slates to allow us to fit a fascia board and a gutter. The house did have a fascia board on it, but the rain ran down the back of the fascia board, which wasn't much good. Now, traditionally, there would have been brackets mounted to the sarking boards underneath the slates, and those brackets would come down and mount the gutters into there. But we haven't got those. They've been taken off at some point in the past. And so I need to find some way of mounting a gutter to an uneven natural stone wall and keeping it far enough back to ensure that the rain lands in the gutter. To solve my problem, I had these steel plates laser profiled out of 2mm stainless steel. The three holes you see correspond to three pieces of stud bar, which I will drill holes into the stone and chemically anchor. I will then fit nuts over them, which will allow me to move the brackets in and out and adjust them in all planes. Onto this, using the single slotted hole, I'll mount the gutter bracket, and in the best traditions of Blue Peter, here's one made earlier. You can see how the bracket mounts on, single bolt goes through, and that allows me to slide the gutter bracket up and down and make sure I get the proper alignment for the drop. I'm also quite lucky because the same arrangement works for these joining brackets as well. So that gives me some flexibility in how it all works. I say I'm lucky. It wasn't really luck. So you can see I've now set myself up a string line, and that line has the fall on it that I want for my gutter to be able to drain. And along that line I have marked at 1 metre intervals the location which corresponds with the bottom hole in my plate. Here we have an example right there. So I'm going to drill the first hole in each location right where I've marked it, and I'm going to mount my plates on that. My first rod will get chemically anchored in there, and I'll attach the plate. And once the plate is attached with one bolt, then I can use that as a drilling guide for where I drill the other two holes. Now you can see, like this one, that's going to be quite easy to drill because it's in the middle of the stone. This one here, well, that lands quite neatly between two stones, so that will drill into the mortar okay. But I did notice one down here, and that one there. That looks like it lands right on the edge of the stone. And well, quite frankly, that's just going to be a pain in the backside. But it doesn't matter, because if I have to move my plate down a little bit or up a little bit, then I can adjust my gutter bracket on that slot, and the bracket will land in just the right place. Fingers crossed this works, because if it doesn't, it's going to be a monumental pain to change. So here we are. I've finished drilling my first set of pilot holes. Quite pleased with them. They've landed pretty well on the string, which into an uneven surface like this is pretty good. They're within a millimetre or so of where I want them, and that's well within the realms of the adjustment that we have in our slot. They went pretty well. Now I've just got to open them up to 8mm. I piloted them with a 5. 8mm is the size I'm using for setting my rods into them, and It's a 6mm rod that I'm using. So I've got a couple of millimetres of clearance there, which using the chemical resin is very useful. You have to have some clearance for the resin obviously to get an amount in there and to make its bond. But it also gives you a little bit of flexibility as to exactly where your rod sits within the hole, so that's good. So here we are, I've now opened out all my holes to 8mm, and you can see they have wandered a little bit. They do open, particularly the holes where you're just on the side of a stone. So this one in particular is on the edge of a stone and in the lime mortar, and it's dropped ever so slightly. But between the clearance that we have with between this threaded rod and the hole size, which is taken up by the chemical resin, and the adjustment that we have on our bracket when we've hit the plastic gutter bracket to the metal plate, then that's not a problem at all. We can take that clearance up easily. The next step, having blown out the holes to clear all the dust and debris, I have a little attachment for my compressor, which a nice long hose reaches from my garage, but I'm quite sure you could use a bike pump or any other kind of pump. If you've watched this video this far through, you're probably more than capable of working out how to blow air out of a hole. Got my gun ready with the mixer nozzle on it. These are a use once item because once the resin goes in there and it starts to mix, and it then starts to harden. So always good to set up as many holes as you can before you start using it and work down those holes reasonably quickly, because you don't want this stuff to be hardening in the nozzle until you've finished with it. So next phase, go and set some anchor bolts into the, or some threaded rod rather, into the holes. So if you've never used chemical resin before, it's very good stuff from the looks of things. I'm using this stuff, just picked it up from the local store. There'll be other ones out there that are probably just as good. Once you've used it, the nozzle, as you can see, it mixes the material as it goes through, and so you need to make sure that you put enough through the nozzle before you start using it so that it's mixed, it's come out a nice consistent colour. But just follow the instructions on the side of the tube, and it'll tell you exactly what to do. Now, compared to mechanical fixing, obviously this stuff is not instant. It takes a little while to cure, but even in cold weather it cures quite quickly. It'll go firm in about 10 to 15 minutes, and then about an hour later and it's hard, it's cured, and it's not going anywhere. So it cures pretty fast. So here I am now. I've used the plate as a drilling guide to drill the top two holes, and I've set the top rods into the chemical resin, and we can see how it all lines up through the holes. However, if the rods aren't dead square and dead straight, then they won't quite line up as I try to take the plate off again. I've got one example here where that's just happened, and you can see, I think you can just about make out that the rod on the right is just a little bit wide. I need to pull it in very slightly. So I've set two nuts up. I use them to protect the threads, and I simply use a deep socket on an extension bar like this, drop it over there like that, and just give a little bit of a bend. Only go a little bit at a time, because you can always go a bit more. And with a bit of luck, it might have sprung back a little bit, but we'll see. It's nearly there. It's very nearly there. I'll give it a bit more of a tweak. You see, it's just not quite lined up. A little bit more, and it'll do the job. Here we go. And there it is. It just slides on there lovely. I might need to do a little alignment on the bottom now, and do the same thing. It just needs to go down ever so slightly. And you can see the process. There we go. I should be able to slide those on without too much difficulty. Lovely. So the next step of the process is I set up my string line again, and I line off the plates to make sure they're on a nice straight line. What you'll notice is that whilst this one is just underneath the nuts, which was where most of them, well, where they should be. You can see that this one I've got just a little bit high. But that's okay because we've got the adjustment in the slot there, and that allows to adjust the vertical position of the actual plastic gutter bracket to accommodate that. That's the joy of trying to drill into stonework, which is uneven, and get it that precise. Once I have them all lined off, I'll use my spirit level, which we can just get in there to set them vertical. So now I've finished lining off all my plates, I'm going to pop them off, mount the plastic gutter brackets to them, and pop them back on again. And I've taken a note of which ones are a little bit high and a little bit low, and I'll set the brackets accordingly, and I should be pretty darn close. Now I'm going to cheat slightly here because I've got a few spare brackets, or a few spare plates rather, so I should be able to pop this one off and replace it if we can. There we go, with that one there. Bingo. So there we have it. For the first time in a long time, this house has a gutter on it which will actually catch the rainwater that comes off the roof and runs downhill all the way to the end. I still have to get the downpipe etc. onto it, but that'll be a pretty straightforward job, and then tied into the drains. You can see from the length, or the varying length, that stud bar, just how uneven this wall is. Was it a little bit of a faff to do? Yes. It's taken me about 3 days to do this, and it's I think it's about 11 metres in length, 10.5, 11 metres from memory. But it was worth it because it's going to work. It wasn't difficult, just a little bit involved. So I always think it's quite interesting to look back having completed the job and say, what would I do differently if I had to do it again? Well, I would probably leave a little bit more clearance in the metal plates for the holes to the studs. They're 6mm studs, and I use a typical sort of engineering clearance of, I think it was 6.5mm. I'd probably make that up to 7 or maybe even 7.5mm, and there's plenty of material in the washers to capture that. I would probably also drill larger holes in the stonework. I drilled an 8mm hole for the 6mm studs, and it's worked fine, but it would be a little bit easier if I'd got a bit more clearance in there. Gives you a little bit more flexibility with the positioning of the holes and the alignment and so forth. And that chemical resin, that's absolutely fine with a couple of millimetres clearance all round. That fills that up and probably does it good. So I'd probably drill them with maybe about a 10mm hole next time. But other than that, I'm really pleased. It's worked well.